Chapter 1. Bea, are you up yet? I groaned into the rug under my face and rolled over. The knocking at the door got louder before it finally opened, and Bobby popped his head through. Bea. I waved a hand from where I was lying next to the bed. I'm here. I'm up, Leet. What are you doing on the floor? He asked as he hurried across the room to help me up. I didn't want to accept his assistance, but I had no choice. My limbs were so weak I could barely push myself off the floor, let alone stand. But he was still looking at me, expecting an answer about my odd choice of sleeping arrangements. Must have fallen off the bed in the middle of the night. I lied again. There was no way I was going to tell him that after tossing and turning for hours I'd finally fallen asleep, only to roll over expecting to bump into a large warm body and felt nothing but cold sheets instead. The wound in my heart ripped right back open, filling my chest with blood and making it impossible to breathe. When I'd finally fought back the flow of tears, I'd thrown my pillow and a blanket on the floor and slid off the bed. Myself on the cold ground. It would be impossible for me to forget where I really was. On the cold ground, I wouldn't accidentally forget he was gone for good. Now, and I was more alone than I'd ever been. Bobby started talking again as he helped me onto the bed, but I mostly tuned him out. I'd been in Charlotte for 2 weeks and the man had hardly shut up once. But when one of his steady stream of words finally penetrated the haze around my brain, I interrupted him. What about the pack? Bobby winced and turned away. I'm afraid the situation isn't much better. I swallowed hard as I watched him cross the room. They still aren't happy I'm alpha. Not only was I more alone than I'd ever been, but I was unwelcome. The Charlotte pack had not been happy to get a new alpha. I'm not sure if it was because I'm a woman or because I'm an outsider, but the welcome from the staff had been frosty, and the enforcers had looked at me with nothing but disdain since I got here. Bobby assured me they'd warm up, but I wasn't so sure. And frankly, I didn't really care. I was just a figurehead until Abby got his ass down here and selected a new leader. This had already gone on long enough. I wasn't an alpha, I was a beta. This wasn't my pack, Asheville was. So, I didn't care that no one wanted me here because I'd rather be anywhere else in the world. It's not that they're not happy, Bobby said, interrupting my thoughts. It's just that change is difficult for everyone. I'm sure they'll come around, he said as he set a tray of food on my lap. What's this? I asked as my stomach cramped at his gesture. Bobby took a seat on the end of my bed and motioned toward the food. I know you never eat breakfast, so I thought I'd bring some up to you. I looked down at the tray of food. Thanks, I muttered. Truth was, I was almost never hungry. I ate enough to keep me going, and that was it. Some days I didn't even do that. I picked up the black coffee and took a sip. It was cold and bitter, but I didn't care enough to add cream or sugar. The meetings went well this morning, and I had a cancellation this afternoon, so it'll be a short day for me, Bobby rambled while I picked at the dry toast on the plate. What happened with the morning meetings? Bobby stopped talking and turned wide brown eyes my way. My cheeks warming with a blush was a foreign sensation to me now. Usually I just felt cold, but it was embarrassing that asking about pack business was so out of the norm for me. I needed to do better. I cleared my throat. The morning meetings. What were they about? Yeah, they were just normal stuff. You know, this one is having trouble with their neighbor, that one needs something fixed in their house. Nothing important. I nodded. Okay, I'll take over the appointments for this afternoon. His eyes widened further. Why? He asked slowly. My cheeks heated again and I looked back down at my plate. I'd honestly been doing a shit job since I'd been here. I spent my days tired as hell but mostly unable to sleep, so I'd shut myself in this bedroom. Let Bobby take over my duties because I honestly hadn't cared, and he'd offered. But enough was enough. For the time being, I was the alpha and I wasn't going to keep foisting my responsibilities on him. I nodded and met his gaze, more sure of myself than I'd been in a long time. It's time I stop relying on you to do my job. Bobby smiled wide and I looked away again. You know I'm happy to help. Do anything to make things easier for you. His dark eyes had a soft look to them that did nothing but curdle my stomach. I appreciate everything you've done for me here. I know I haven't been the easiest person to work with. I could still feel his gaze on me as he spoke. It's been nothing but a pleasure having you here. Why did his nice words make me feel so gross inside? I cleared my throat and looked up at him again. Thanks, Bobby. What time is? The first appointment this afternoon. The corners of his eyes creased as he watched me. Next one is at noon. You know you don't have to do this, right? I know dealing with the pack is not something you enjoy doing. He wasn't wrong, but it was my job and I do it anyway. It's okay. I'll manage. But I'd be more than happy to keep taking care of them for you. It's really no problem at all. And since the pack already knows and trusts me, it's easier on everyone involved. I opened my mouth to argue back, but my breath caught in my lungs as I thought about what he said. Maybe I was inserting myself somewhere no one wanted me. Maybe the pack was perfectly happy dealing with Bobby instead of the strange alpha none of them wanted. Maybe I should just keep hiding in this room until I was finally allowed to go home. But failing at this and then tucking my tail and running home didn't feel right either. I wasn't a quitter, and I wasn't afraid of a challenge. This pack didn't have to like me, but while I was in charge here, I'd do what I could for them. No, I shook my head. It's time I started pulling my weight around here. I'll handle the afternoon meetings. Bobby looked like he wanted to argue some more, but finally pressed his lips together and looked away. Okay, if you're sure, he said with a shrug. I picked up a slice of orange and twisted it between my fingers, not really knowing if I was sure or not. Thanks for bringing me breakfast, but I think I'll take a shower first, I said, hoping he'd take the hint and leave. Bobby nodded. Of course. I'm happy to. He glanced at me out of the corner of his eye. I know you haven't been eating much. My face heated again as I realized my self-destructive behavior had been more noticeable than I'd thought. Or maybe it was just because Bobby always seemed to be around. I appreciate it, I muttered. Bobby stood and stretched, his Henley riding up his toned stomach. I looked away before he could catch the unimpressed look on my face. Hey, you know, I've been thinking you should get out of the estate for a little while. Get some fresh air. I frowned his way. Why would I want to do that? He chuckled. I'm serious. I bet you could use a stiff drink and some stale bar peanuts. I'm buying. I narrowed my eyes. Would it just be the two of us? A smile spread across his face. It was nice but did nothing for me. It could be just the two of us if that's what you want. I sighed as I carefully climbed to my weak legs. I don't shit where I eat. Bobby. He didn't miss a beat. Like he'd been expecting my answer. Yeah, but there's nothing wrong with fucking where you feast, right? My wide eyes met his from across the room as a million different thoughts sped through my mind, and not a single one of them ended with me and Bobby in that bed behind me. Bobby, what? His grin never wavered. You know what? Maybe some other time. He turned and walked toward the door while I stood there still gaping at him. I'll see you later, he called over his shoulder as he left the room. Bobby closed the door behind him, leaving me in the wake of that awkward conversation. What was he even thinking asking me out like that? I was his superior. The brand new alpha having a fling with the beta just had disaster written all over it. Besides, it wasn't like I'd want anything to do with him anyway. It wasn't like I could think about anyone besides the one man I couldn't have. I squeezed my eyes closed and willed the tears away. I'd have plenty of time to cry once the day was over. For now, I needed to straighten my spine and get through the next couple of hours. Then I'd be free to fall apart. The shower took longer than I'd planned because I had to keep stopping to rest. Until that point, I hadn't realized how weak I'd gotten, how far I'd let myself fall. I swore then that I'd start taking better care of myself, eating all 3 meals, working out again, sleeping at night, and then waking up with a sunrise like I used to. My hair was still wet as I hurried out of my borrowed room for the 12 o'clock meeting. I just turned to shut the door when I noticed the other person standing in the hall. I jumped a bit but recovered quickly. Hey Mary, I said to the head maid in the house. I honestly hated that title, but Bobby insisted. The middle-aged werewolf's face never changed expressions. Hello, Alpha. I'm here to collect your breakfast tray. Oh, of course. Sorry. Have you been waiting long? I asked as I opened the bedroom door again. I've been here since I delivered the tray. My stomach pinched deep inside me. You've been out there all this time? Why didn't you just knock? I asked, feeling horrible I'd made the poor woman wait for my dishes while I bathed like a sloth. Her brown eyes were cold as they met mine. I was told not to disturb you. I frowned at her face, her tone, her body language. Everything about her said. She was on the defense. Like she was waiting for a blow to come at any moment. Was she really worried I'd be the one to attack her? I shook my head. Listen, Mary, you don't need to stand in the hall for 2 hours waiting for my plates. I'm perfectly capable of bringing them down. Myself. Her eyes got wide. Oh no, Alpha. That isn't necessary. I'm happy to serve. What the actual fuck did my uncle do to these people? I grabbed the tray and turned back to Mary. First of all, call me Bea or Beatrice if I'm in trouble. Second of all, I'm not the useless piece of shit that Conrad was. I appreciate you bringing my breakfast to my room, but next time I can take the dishes back down myself. Mary nodded as she accepted the tray from me. If that's what you'd like, she said, her eyes downcast. I blew out a frustrated breath as I realized I wasn't going to be able to get through to her in one day. In fact, it only irritated me more that I'd spent so much time hiding in this room. I should already know the people who'd been feeding me and doing my laundry for weeks. It was pathetic that I didn't. With a burst of energy I didn't know I had, I raced Mary for the door, getting there moments before and holding it open for her. The maid's eyes were still wide as she gave me a nod and slipped into the hallway. I watched her go for a moment, wondering how awful it must have been working for my uncle. I'd make sure whoever Abby put in charge here treated these people with more respect. Realizing it must be close to noon, I started shuffling in the direction Mary disappeared to. This estate was just as large as the lodge back in Asheville, but it had 90% fewer people in it. The halls were always quiet, the rooms empty save for the 2 women who worked here and me. I didn't know why Conrad chose to surround himself with gilded walls instead of people, but that was going to have to be a mystery left unsolved. I just made it to the ground floor when I remembered I didn't even know where these meetings were taking place. Fortunately for me, Bobby was never far away. Hey Bea, how was your shower? I frowned at him. He was really laying it on a little thick today. Hot. His smile grew. I'll bet. I looked away just as his grin started to churn my stomach. Where are the meetings being held? In the throne room. I'll show you, he said. I tried not to notice the way he came too close as he walked by. Bobby chatted at me down the long hallways, and as usual, I was only half listening. You know, Tracy is one of our more difficult pack members. I'm sure she's here to complain about the same things as usual. You really don't need to sit through one of her tirades today. I'm sure I can handle it. Yeah, but why should you have to? He asked as he stopped outside a massive set of double doors. Bobby pulled one open and ushered me inside. Why would you do something unpleasant like that when you have me around to do it for? You? He asked, his body so close to mine his warm breath blew the tiny hairs on the back of my neck. I took a big step forward before turning around to face him again. Bobby, I'm not some delicate flower that needs protecting. I'm perfectly capable of sitting through a couple grievance meetings with some pack members. He shrugged. Of course you are. I just figured it made more sense for me to take care of this for you because I know this pack. They're already comfortable coming to me with their issues. I grit my teeth as I fought with his sensible words. Deep down I knew he was right, but I was too stubborn to admit it. Just send in the first appointment when they get here. Chapter 2. B. Wait a second. What is this? I asked as I finally took in the room Bobby led me to. It's the throne room. My wide eyes landed on an actual throne before I turned back to Bobby. This is where you take your grievance meetings. He shrugged. That's what Conrad always did. I shook my head as I eyed the ridiculous throne at the head of the room. This place was even more fucked up than I thought. I waved a dismissive hand in Bobby's direction. Okay, whatever. Just send Tracy in when she gets here. He sighed but didn't say anything before his footsteps faded away. When I was sure he was gone, I let my shoulders slump like they'd been wanting to and let out a deep breath. Truthfully, I was exhausted. It was taking everything in me to just stand upright at this point. I was in no shape to conduct any kind of pack business, but I had to. I couldn't keep hiding in that dark bedroom upstairs. A couple sets of footsteps sounded in the hall outside, and I did my best to pull myself together before they got here. When the knock came on the ornate oak doors, I stood awkwardly in the middle of the room as I called for them to enter. Bobby swung the door open and poked his head inside. I've got your noon appointment here, he said unnecessarily. I barely held back an eye roll. Send her in. A middle-aged woman with dirty blonde hair stepped carefully around Bobby as she entered the room. Alpha, she said, her eyes on the ground. I sighed. Please call me Bea. Tracy's eyes darted to Bobby before they swung my way. The beta werewolf stood there stoic as the tension in the room grew. Of course, Tracy mumbled, her gaze still downcast. I looked up at him. Thanks, Bobby. He nodded but continued to stand there. It looked like I'd need to be clearer with him because subtle hints didn't seem to be working. Bobby, I'm all set. You can go now. His dark gaze swung my way for a moment before he finally nodded. Of course. I'll be nearby if you need me. Actually, I called and waited as he turned back around. Could you let the enforcers know there's a mandatory meeting tonight? Bobby's eyes widened. For what? The old fire that used to always live inside me flared bright for a moment. For the mandatory things I need to tell them, I said, slower this time so he wouldn't have trouble hearing. Bobby's face was still as stone as he stared at me. Finally he nodded. I'll take care of it. I turned my back on Bobby as I heard him leave the room. It was clear I'd let too much slip while I'd been here. The second in command should not be questioning me the way he had today, and I knew that meant we'd need to have a conversation. Eventually. I shook my head and turned to Tracy. Okay. Let's find somewhere to sit so we can talk about what's going on. We both stood in the middle of the large room and came to the same conclusion. Simultaneously. The only seat here is that ridiculous throne, huh? Tracy's breath caught in her lungs, but it soon turned into a nervous giggle. I turned just as she wiped the smile off her face. I'm happy to stand. Alpha. I waved her words away as I nodded toward the set of stairs that led to the platform where the throne Saturday. We can sit on the steps. Tracy was silent as she followed me slowly across the room. I wished I could have walked confidently with my head high and my shoulders back, but I wasn't even sure I'd make it to the other end of the room without a break. With every ounce of grit I had, I pushed through. My legs were shaking and there was a layer of sweat on my forehead, but I made it. I tried to carefully lower myself down, but my limbs finally failed me, and I fell the rest of the way there. Tracy gasped and hurried over to me. Alpha? Are you okay? I gave her the best smile I could manage as I used the last remaining strength. I had to sit up straight. Well, as straight as possible. I'm fine. Thank you, I muttered, hoping she wouldn't push it. After an uncomfortable pause, Tracy nodded and took a seat on the step below. Me. Of course, she said, her eyes on the ground again. When I finally caught my breath, I turned to face her. Okay, what brings you here? She glanced up. Well, I thought I'd be talking to Bobby today. He's the one I've been dealing with for the past few months. My teeth ground together as I tried to keep the smile on my face. Well, I'm here today, and I'm happy to help with whatever it is. Tracy's gaze was wary as she set her purse on her lap and dug inside it. Eva. Got a receipt here I was hoping to have reimbursed. Okay, what is it for? Well, I only brought the most recent receipt for the mold removal, but I've got more at home for the roof repair and water damage. Whoa. Mold? How long have you had the leak? Tracy pursed her lips. Over a year. Why didn't you report it sooner? I reported it the day it started. My jaw fell open as I sat there blinking at her. Why wasn't it fixed? Her face creased the smallest bit, like she was holding back the real expression she wanted to make. I would say you could ask Conrad, but we both know that's not possible anymore. Knowing how awful my uncle was, I shouldn't have been surprised he was also a slumlord. But I was. It was an alpha's job to take care of their pack. There was a reason every wolf paid tithes each month. You were supposed to use that money to make sure they were happy and healthy, not spend it on an empty estate and a goddamn throne room. How many other people in this pack were suffering because of his neglect? I closed my eyes for a moment and shook my head. When I opened them again, I caught Tracy's gaze and held on. Okay, listen. I want you to tell me everything from the start, and when we're done here, I want you to go home and get the rest of your receipts. I'll make sure you're compensated for everything you've had to pay for out of pocket. The wolf, who was probably around my mom's age, smiled. You're just like them, you know. Like who? Your parents. I blinked slowly at her as memories of my mom and dad and their time as alphas of this pack swam through my mind. You probably don't remember me, do you? I frowned as I looked at her closer. No. She shrugged, the smile still on her face. It's okay. You kids were so young. When you left, I used to play cards with your mom on Tuesdays.
I stirrte her harder.
Oh yeah, Tracy Fitzpatrick, right? I'm so sorry. Didn't recognize you at first. Oh please, don't apologize. We're all just so happy you're back. I frowned again. Tracy opened her mouth to speak just as the big double doors were thrown wide open. Bobby stalked into the room, his eyes sharp. What is it? I asked, the irritation clear in my voice. Bobby looked from Tracy to me before speaking. I'm sorry to interrupt, but you've got a visitor. I froze in shock, my aching heart pumping harder in my chest. Could it be him? Would he have followed me down here? Did he change his mind about us? I climbed to my shaking legs and asked the question I needed answered but was terrified to voice. Who is it? I croaked. Beatrice. I froze again at my brother's voice. There was only one moment for me to wonder what he was doing here before he burst into the throne room behind Bobby. My beta's jaw ticked as he eyed Abraham. I told you I'd bring her out to you. Abby, never one to do as he was told, clapped Bobby on the shoulder as he walked past. No need. I found her myself. What are you doing here? I asked. My brother's blue eyes landed on me, and instantly all my secrets felt exposed. We need to talk. Privately. I can take over this appointment, Bobby called from the doorway. I glanced at Tracy to find her mouth set in a firm line again. We're actually done here, I said and watched as her shoulders fell a fraction of an inch. Tracy, can you get back to me by this time tomorrow? She nodded as she rose to her feet. Of course. I did my best to stand as gracefully as she had, but instead I huffed and puffed as I climbed to shaking legs. Okay, great. I'll see you then, I said, my voice breathy and weak. Tracy shot me one more concerned glance before she hurried out of the room. Abraham and I seemed to notice the ever-present Beta at the same time, and before he could open his mouth and cause a scene, I spoke up. Abby, let's go up to my room and talk. His gaze met mine and he nodded. That works. I tried to stride confidently across the large room, but I failed in that, too. I could feel Abraham's critical gaze like a laser on the side of my face. As soon as we were behind closed doors, I knew I was in for a tirade. Do you want me to bring up some lunch? Bobby asked as we made it to the door. No thanks, I said as we walked past him. Let me know if you two need anything, he called after us. I caught Abraham's eye roll and knew Bobby was just as exasperating to him as he was to me. My brother kept up with my snail-like pace and somehow also managed to stay silent until we were safely in my room. But of course that's when the piece ended. What the fuck is wrong with you? I spun around in the middle of the room, my jaw practically on the floor. Nice to see you too, asshole. His expression stayed the same. I'm serious. What the fuck is wrong with you? You know you could have called first instead of interrupting my appointments. He took a menacing step forward and his right eye twitched. I have been calling Beatrice. For days I've been calling and you haven't been answering. Would you like to explain that? I winced. Oh, I think my phone's been dead. You think your phone has been dead, but you don't know? Are you kidding me? Right now. Okay, Abraham, I get it. I'm sorry. No, you don't fucking get it, he yelled over me. The only form of communication I have with you is your goddamn cell phone and you let it die. Days ago. What if something happened? How would you get in touch with me? I rolled my eyes. I've just been in this room. What's gonna happen, Abby? Stubbed my toe on the bedpost. His eyes narrowed as his face got redder. Why have you been sequestered in this room? What the fuck is wrong with you? Nothing. I exploded. I'm just tired and I haven't been eating well lately. But I'm fine. You're fine, he seethed. Fine, he yelled this time. You can barely fucking walk. Why the hell did you send Matthias away when you were like this? Because he wanted to be here even less than I do. His hands clenched into fists as he stared me down. Any son of a bitch in this pack could challenge you and you'd be too weak to even defend yourself. And your motherfucking phone has been dead so you wouldn't even be able to call me after you got your ass kicked. Or worse. Abraham paused for a moment, his teeth grinding. You know they don't have to stop, right? You know a werewolf challenging an alpha is well within their right to kill their opponent. Is that what you want, B? You want to fucking Die here because you're not taking care of yourself. No. I screamed, the tears already running down my face. I don't want to. I'm just so fucking tired. Abraham shook his head, his expression still stern. Bea, he warned. I buried my face in my hands as a sob tore from my throat. I can't do this anymore. I don't want to be here, I cried. When I lifted my head and met his eyes, they were the softest they'd been since he got here. Can't I just come home? My brother sighed and crossed the room to pull me into his arms. I went, willingly, breathing his familiar scent into my lungs and letting myself fall apart, knowing for the first time in a long time there was someone there to hold my pieces together. His hand cupped the back of my head, and he pushed my face harder into his chest. What's going on, Bea? Is this just because you haven't been eating? I don't know. I wailed. I can't sleep, I can't eat, I can hardly get out of bed. It just keeps getting worse. Abraham's muscles tensed beneath my face. Bea, he whispered before he cleared his throat. Is this because of Will? It was my turn to tense. Are you too faded? He continued softly. My heart leapt into the back of my throat, where it hammered unevenly. Of course the thought had crossed my mind. How could it not? After seeing the way Abraham was every time his mate left him, I had to wonder if I was experiencing the same thing. I just never been able to accept it. Never let myself dare to hope it was true. But Abraham was standing there saying all the things I'd been thinking, and it felt more real than ever. I don't know, I finally whispered. My brother stared at me for a moment, 100 thoughts passing behind his eyes. Finally, he ripped his gaze away and ran a hand through his messy hair. I didn't realize, he muttered. Will hasn't. Abraham stopped talking, his mouth slamming shut with a loud crack of his teeth. I pulled further away. Will hasn't what? Nothing. Abraham, finish your sentence. Will hasn't what? He winced as he looked at everything but me. Will hasn't shown any symptoms. That I've noticed. My heart that had been banging away in my throat fell at top speeds through the bottom of my stomach. I half expected to hear it fall to the floor with a splat. There were 100 things I wanted to say but stuck with the most important. Will's still in Asheville? Abraham nodded slowly. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath through my nose. He said he was leaving. All I know is he's still there. I don't know how long he plans to stay. I nodded slowly as I continued to take deep, even breaths. The implications danced through my head furiously as I tried to decide how I felt. Relieved that he wasn't already gone for good. Sad that we could have been together all this time if I hadn't been sent to Charlotte. Hurt that he'd keep his distance from me, even though he was still in the state. But most of all, devastation that what I'd been feeling wasn't the fated mate's withdrawal. Chapter 3. Somehow going to magically be the woman he'd waited all this time for. I was what I'd always been. Just another footnote in the long story of his life. I knew Abraham was still waiting for me to say something, but the only thing I could get out without breaking down was, so I guess I can't come home. Abraham sighed and walked over to pull me into his arms again. You can always come home, Bea. Always, he said against the top of my head. When he let out another deep breath and pushed me back again, I knew there was more he had to say. But I think the best thing for you would be to stay here. I shook my head.
No, Abraham.
Don't make me stay. This pack does not want me. These enforcers can't stand to look at me.
No.
I want to go home. Hear me out, he said as he held up his hands and took another step back. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. You could do amazing things with this pack. I shook my head again. I'm not an alpha. You are an alpha. You weren't born to be someone's second in command. You've got so much more to offer than that. My shoulders slumped as I realized his mind was already made up. I think you should really give yourself a chance. I know you can run this pack better than Conrad did. As soon as these wolves get to know you, they'll love you as much as Asheville does. They'll follow you anywhere after that. My eyes swam with tears as that cold, lonely feeling settled in my gut again. I don't think I can do this, I whispered. Abraham wrapped his arms around my shoulders again. I know you can. And I'm going to help you. I'll have a whole truck full of Asheville enforcers here by tonight to help you turn this pack around, okay? Promise. I'm going to fix this. Chapter 4. Will.
Wilhelm.
Open your eyes. Where did I know that voice from? It was foreign and yet so familiar. I did as it asked though and cracked open my lids. As soon as I did, I wished I'd kept them closed. I was back in that dark hut in ancient Germany, staring at the mud ceiling, knowing exactly what came next. Her soft whimper broke the silence in the room, and I winced like I was the one in pain. I climbed to my feet and turned to find Bea curled in a ball on the floor, her body rocking side to side in agony. She's dying, Wilhelm. I spun around to the voice I'd heard earlier and found a face I hadn't seen in 5,000 years. Emma. The witch that started this all nodded. Yes, I'm here. Bea cried out behind me and I yearned to go to her. Why are you here? Asked through gritted teeth. To deliver a message. A message? I see that. You think I want to hear anything you have to say?
Emma smiled sadly.
You're angry. Of course I'm angry. You took everything from me. I told you there was a price. A growl ripped from my throat, but I somehow held myself still. Yes, but you didn't say I'd be paying for eternity, or that the course of human history would forever be changed from a single deal with the devil. She shook her head, the sad smile still on her face. I'm sorry it's taken so long. That was inexcusable. My eyes widened as I stared at her. Inexcusable? You think the thousands of years of torment I've endured is just inexcusable? She stood from her seat and took a step closer. I had to wait for the perfect match. I had to make sure she was strong enough to withstand your demons but vulnerable enough to need you too. I shook my head. What are you talking about? Emma nodded over my shoulder. Your mate. She's dying without you. I closed my eyes and withstood the urge to look at Bea's broken body behind me. What are you talking about? I asked again, anger seeping into my voice. As I looked at the witch. This is just a dream, I said, hoping to convince the both of us. Beatrice is your fated mate, and she is dying. Not in a hut in Europe from a werewolf bite. She's dying in a room by herself of a broken heart. I stumbled back a step, just barely catching myself. You can't die of a broken heart. Emma shook her head again. You can when you're fated. My heart stopped dead in my chest as she used that word again. Fated? What? I breathed. She smiled again. Beatrice was born to be your mate. You finally met your match. My legs shook as I stared at the witch, looking for some sign she could be lying to me. How? I croaked. I cleared my throat and tried again. How could she be my mate? I've been apart from her for weeks and I'm not sick. Emma's smile turned sad again. Wilhelm, don't you think you've suffered enough? For the first time in thousands of years my eyes filled with tears and I looked away before one could fall. Because you've endured so many years of grief, you're getting the option that no other werewolf has ever been given. I turned back to Emma just as the wind picked up inside the hut, and her hair began to swirl around her face. You're being given a choice, Wilhelm, but you have to choose now. You can accept Beatrice as your fated mate, but you'll have to forsake your immortality and die when she does. Or you can deny her and continue to live on indefinitely. My heart thundered in my chest as I watched my life fork in two directions. Challenged everything I thought I knew and what I imagined the rest of my existence to be, which was lonely and filled with darkness. She doesn't have much longer, so you have to decide now. Wait, what do you mean she doesn't have much longer? What's wrong with her? The wind died down slightly as Emma shook her head. She's going through withdrawals. She can't survive for long without her fated mate. My stomach twisted deep inside me. Bea was in pain because of me. Bea was suffering because of me. What if I choose to deny her? Would she get better? Emma paused for a moment before nodding. Yes. Your bond would be severed. My blood ran cold at those words. Did I want to sever my bond with Bea?
No.
Not at all. These past 2 weeks apart from her had been torture, even without the withdrawal symptoms. I was in love with Beatrice and every single part of me yearned to be with her. But was I selfish enough to inflict myself upon her?
Wilhelm.
She's running out of time. How? I finally yelled. How can I doom her to be my mate after everything I've done? After all the lives I've ruined and the deaths I've caused? How could you curse her to be with me? Emma's dark eyes softened again. She's seen the darkness you try to hide and she loves you anyway. My heart was back behind my ribs, hammering away like it would break through. I squeezed my eyes closed and nodded. Okay. I opened them again and met
Ima es gaze.
Okay, I repeated. I want her.
Ima smiled.
And you're willing to give up forever? It isn't worth anything without her. The witch nodded as the wind picked up again, slamming against my body and knocking me back a step. Go to her, Wilhelm, she said, her voice seeming to echo from every corner of the hut. I backed away slowly, my eyes still on the witch. When I finally turned around, I found nothing but empty space. I raced to where I'd last seen Bea's body, but she was gone. When I spun back to face Ima, she'd disappeared as well. The only thing left behind was the wind, and it slammed against the walls with enough force to break them down. Boom! 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 Will! The dark room around me dissolved and another took its place. I sat up in my borrowed bed in Asheville, North Carolina, just in time for their alpha to come storming through the door. How fucking dare you? He bellowed as he slammed the door closed behind him. I was on my feet in the blink of an eye. What are you talking about? My goddamn sister. I kept quiet as I stared at him, a little surprised this had taken so long. I'd expected some form of confrontation weeks ago. You won't deny it? Abraham yelled. Of course not. So you admit you slept with her? Yes, I'm in love with her. This seemed to enrage him. His fists clenched tight as he took a threatening step toward me. You're going to give me that bullshit line after I've seen what you did to her? What are you talking about? I haven't done anything to her. Then why is she down in Charlotte right now, half dead? He boomed. A sharp pain stabbed me in the gut as I thought about what the witch said. About how she was dying without me. About how she didn't have much time left. Go to her. That voice echoed in my head again, and I knew I had to listen. I have to go, I murmured as I tried to walk past him. Abraham grabbed my arm and tossed me back a few steps. My shoulders tensed. Instantly ready for anything. I held no ill will toward him, but if he insisted on standing between me and my mate, I wouldn't hesitate to go through him. The need to get to her burned through my veins like fire, and I knew the only thing that would douse it was her. You're not fucking going anywhere, Abraham snarled. I'd like to see you try to stop me. The alpha's limbs began to shake, but before he could shift, I launched myself at him. We went reeling back, smashing through the door and into the hall as we grappled. His big body landed on top of mine before I flipped us and took control back. Over and over we rolled, fighting for dominance with neither of us anywhere close to winning. What in the hell is going on here? A voice yelled, but we both ignored them. You abused my hospitality and then you fucked over my sister, Abraham ground out as he landed a punch to my side. I launched him off me, wasting no time throwing myself back on top of him. I've worked on your lands every day I've been here, and I never wanted to let her go. I said. Someone yelled again, closer this time. In the next instant, Abraham was ripped off me and thrown across the hall. The youngest McCoy sister stood there between us, hands on her hips and an angry scowl on her face. What the hell is going on here? Abraham was already on his feet, but I climbed to mine slower. I was done fighting. This son of a bitch has been sleeping with our sister for months and then let her go off to Charlotte by herself. His angry blue eyes swung my way. Were you bored? Is that it? Was it time to move on already? A growl rumbled through my chest as I struggled to hold myself still. Letting her walk away from me was the hardest thing I've ever done. Oh really, he sneered. You think you have it worse than she does? She can barely stand up. She's a walking fucking target in that pack and we're just lucky no one's tried to take her out already. My heart stopped in my chest and someone gasped nearby. His words slowly sank, in each one making me sicker than the last. Bea was hurt. She was in danger. And I was fucking hours away. Go to her. The voice was back and as insistent as ever. I needed to get to Bea now. However, when I looked up, there was an entire wall of McCoy siblings staring at me, and a row of enforcers lined up behind them. Seemed I wasn't getting out of this situation without explaining myself. But if they tried to keep me a moment longer, I'd have no problem resorting to fighting my way through. Why are you even still here if you've already dumped our sister? Delilah asked as she crossed her arms over her chest. I met her gaze for as long as I could before I looked away. Leaving felt too
Permanent.
like I was losing her for good. What a bunch of bullshit. Abraham roared. Why are you perfectly fine while our sister is fighting for her life down there? I haven't been sick because the witch took mercy on me, I explained, meeting each of their eyes one by one. She just came to me in a dream and told me we were fated and that I need to go to her now. Why didn't you just go with her from the start? Kelly asked, remembering that last morning with Bea when she'd asked me to come to Charlotte was enough to rip open the old wounds. They burned and bled as I met her eyes. I loved her too much to stay with her and watch her grow old without me. Kelly's gaze shuddered as she nodded and looked away. Having recently met her own fated mate, I knew she understood. Okay, so what's different now? Dell spoke up again. I almost laughed. What was different now? Every single goddamn thing in my life was different. Now, I had a mate, a fated mate, someone I'd get to spend the rest of my life with, someone I'd actually get to keep. After all this time, I'd finally found the place where I belonged, and it was beside Bea. She's my fated mate. I'll never have to live without her. A sob rang out from the back of the group and the werewolves parted to reveal my great-great-granddaughter. Tears streamed down Elizabeth's red face as she watched me. You finally found her. I couldn't stop the smile that spread across my face, just like I couldn't stop the joy from zipping through my system and lighting my entire body on fire. I have. Abraham approached me next. His entire demeanor shifted. You have to get to her. She's not safe. Gasps rang through the crowd, but I tuned them out as I tried to hold myself still. What's happening? Abraham's eyes turned cold again. She's so weak anyone in that pack could take her out and claim her position. I've left 5 men there, but Charlotte has 10 times as many enforcers. She needs help and she needs to get better now. The urgency made my feet itch to move, but they were still standing in my way. I was ready to start pushing through them when Abraham dangled a set of keys in front of me. Take my truck. I accepted them like the lifeline they were. Don't hurt her and don't let anything happen to her, Abraham ordered. Usually I'd hate the authority in his voice directed at me, but in this instance I understood, and I had no trouble obeying. She'll be safe, I promised before I darted between the people in my way and raced outside. For the first time in forever, there was nothing standing between me and Bea. There was nothing stopping us from being together. There were no ancient fears or ghosts to contend with. I just had to get there before anything happened to her, and our forever was cut short. Chapter 5. Bea. I think that went really well. I tried not to roll my eyes at Bobby as we filed out of the throne room. Unfortunately, it was the only space big enough to hold all the enforcers. Refused to sit in the ridiculous chair, though. I was the only one who said anything. And you did great. This time I didn't stop the eye roll. I'd let Abby talk me into waiting until the morning to hold the enforcer meeting. He'd argued we'd all be in better shape with a full night of sleep. Even though I hadn't had one of those in over 2 weeks, I went along with it. Especially since Bobby seemed to think the other enforcers would be happy about rescheduling too. But happy was not a word I'd use to describe any of the Charlotte men today. They seemed to really love the new training schedule. I deadpanned. Bobby looked at me out of the corner of his eye. Well, we don't do that here. I scoffed. Yeah, and that's why you lost a war with a pack a quarter your size. Bobby's shoulders tensed. Yes, well, Conrad. I tuned out his words as my heart started thumping harder. The beta wolf must have heard it too because he stopped rambling and turned to me. Are you all right? I put a hand over my chest as my pulse picked up its pace even more. I don't. The roar of a truck approaching outside must have reached us at the same time, because both our heads swung to the front doors. We were silent as we listened to the loud engine get closer and closer. Finally, the gravel out front crunched beneath big tires as whoever it was pulled onto the long driveway. My chest ached with how hard my heart pounded, and now there was no mistaking who it was outside. Thoughts and hopes and fears all swirled through my head as my heavy feet shuffled forward. Bobby was still talking, but I ignored him as I listened to the truck pull up out front and the engine cut off. I stood there in front of the doors, too afraid to open them, too afraid to see his face and risk hearing him tell me goodbye again. But I could feel him getting closer. I could hear the familiar sound of his breathing, the crunch of his shoes on the gravel as he walked toward the estate. There was no escaping him, there was only the opportunity to do it with dignity. I yanked open the large doors and stepped outside. Will was at the bottom of the front steps, his body frozen in place. I pulled them closed behind me and walked across the wooden porch as I Searched his face for the answers to all the questions raging in my head. Like, what was he doing here? Why didn't he leave Asheville when he was supposed to? Why wasn't he sick like I was? But mostly, why was he looking at me like he was seeing me for the very first time? Bea, he said, his deep rumble just loud enough to cross the distance separating us. I barely suppressed a shiver. What are you doing here? I asked, proud that my voice didn't crack and only shook a little. Will climbed onto the first step. I came to get you back. His words evoked a vicious sense of hope that ripped right through my gut. Each letter tore its own slice out of me as I stood there speechless. I came as soon as I could. As soon as I knew, he continued. The words were so simple, so clear as he took another step. I held my breath as the breeze brought his scent toward me. It was familiar. Comforting. I squeezed my eyes closed and shook my head. Knew what? I heard the wooden steps creak under his shoes as he climbed another step. Higher. That you were my mate. My eyes snapped open to meet his, shocked to find him so close already. That I'm free to love you as much as I want. Because I'll never have to lose you. He took the last few steps and stopped right in front of me. His hand shook as he reached out to cup my face. The first of my tears broke through as I tried to steel myself against him, to protect what was left of my heart. What are you talking about? I whispered. Will use his other hand to wipe the moisture off my face. The witch came to me in a dream. She told me we were fated. I wanted to believe his words, but the evidence was staring me right in the face. But you're not sick. He shook his head as he took a step closer. These past couple of weeks, without you, were some of the darkest of my life. But no, I haven't been experiencing the withdrawal like you have. Despite my best efforts, hope had begun to take root deep inside me, just in time for another blow to strike it down. I somehow dragged myself out of his hold. Then we're not fated. There must be something else wrong with me. Will shook his head again, wrapping his big hands around my waist and stepping closer. We are fated. She spared me the withdrawal symptoms. She let me give up immortality to be with you. My body trembled beneath his steady hands as I met his gaze. What does that mean? I whispered. He bent his head and rested it on mine. It means we're always going to be together. It means someday when we're old and we've had a whole lifetime to love each other, we'll get to die together too. A sob ripped free from my throat, and Will pulled me to his chest. So you're not leaving anymore? I asked. He chuckled, the sound loud in my ear. No. I'm never leaving. Not without you. My legs gave out beneath me, but Will's strong arms were there. He picked me up and held me close as I studied his handsome face. The deep lines that used to mar his forehead were nowhere to be found. The stress he used to carry in his shoulders gone. But I only had seconds to catalog the differences before his lips were on mine and I forgot everything else. This kiss was slow and luxurious, like he had nowhere to be but right here, with his mouth on mine. Every other kiss we'd ever shared had felt rushed or incomplete somehow. But this was everything. This was two lonely souls permanently entwining. This was two worlds colliding, while two hearts slowly mended. This was what I'd been waiting my whole life for. When Will finally dragged his mouth away from mine, we were both breathless, but he continued to dot kisses on my face. I'm sorry it took me so long, he muttered against my cheek. I'm sorry you're so sick. I smiled as the tears welled up again. I'm feeling better now. He pulled back and smiled at me, his dimples making my heart finally start beating again. I am too. I stared up into his green eyes as a wave of vertigo hit me, and I had to look away. Whoa, I whispered. Will lifted me into his arms. What's going on? What's wrong? I shook my head, eyes squeezed tight. I don't know. I think I'm just still weak. He was quiet for a moment. Have you been eating and drinking regularly? No. I haven't been able to force much down. Will sighed before we started moving. I opened my eyes just in time to watch him stride across the porch and yank the door open. Where's the kitchen? He asked just as another voice rang out. What the hell do you think you're doing? Bobby shouted. His heavy steps clapped against the marble floor as he charged toward us. Will spun around to shield me as a growl ripped from his chest. Bobby, stop. I tried to yell, but my voice was so weak it was barely audible. More footsteps thundered from nearby as the foyer filled with the sounds of angry shouts and heavy breathing. I tried to struggle out of Will's hold, but I didn't have the strength. Put me down, I muttered as I fought against his strong hands. No, he growled, his whole body shaking like he was going to shift at any moment. You can't protect me like this, I tried again. Let me go so you can shift. His eyes darted to me before they snapped back toward Bobby and the group of irate enforcers behind him. He slowly set me on my feet and waited until I'd caught my balance to step in front of me. Who the hell are you, and what are you doing with our alpha? Bobby snarled. Bobby, I yelled from behind Will, but my weak voice was overshadowed by his loud roar. I grabbed Will's arm and tugged, but he was ignoring me. Can you two settle the hell down? I grunted as I struggled to keep him still. Matthias appeared out of nowhere, placing his massive body between the two furious werewolves. You need to calm the fuck down and back the fuck up, he said to Bobby, his big arms crossed over his even bigger chest. The beta werewolf glared daggers at my enforcer. You are on my land. You don't tell me what to do. No, I called as I finally managed to sidestep Will. But I do. Stand down. Bobby. His dark eyes swung my way. Are you fucking serious? This random wolf drives onto our pack lands and then strolls inside carrying your limp body, and you expect me to stand down? He yelled before he turned to Will. How the hell did you even get past the guards at the gate? We have a man stationed there. He must have let him in, Matthias spoke up. Bobby spared a single glare up at him before he turned back to Will. I want to know who the hell you are. My werewolf shoulders were so tense they almost reached his ears before I stepped in front of him. Bobby, this is Will. He's the original werewolf. I took a deep, shaky breath before I continued. He's also my mate. So back the fuck off. Bobby ripped his angry gaze off Will to stare at me. You're what? He asked, his voice ice cold. Will stepped up next to me and wrapped a heavy arm around my shoulders. I'm her mate. Bobby's dark eyes jumped back and forth between us before they finally settled on me. I wasn't aware you were involved with anyone. I shrugged. We're fated. Bobby's gaze widened as he stared at me. Does that mean he'll be a permanent new addition here? He asked with a smile that looked too strained to be genuine. My heart beat harder as I struggled to answer that question. Finally, Will pulled me tighter against his side and spoke for me. Yes, I'll be wherever she is from now on. My chest filled so full it felt like it would crack my ribcage. Those simple words were powerful enough to leave me breathless. I turned to look up at Will, marveling at how easy this was for him, how sure he seemed to be about everything, whereas it felt like I was just barely keeping up. Now, if you'll excuse us, Bea needs to eat. I was just about to have the maid start lunch, Bobby responded. No need, Will said as he scooped me back into his arms, ignoring my gasp. I got it. He looked down at me, his eyes going soft. Which way to the kitchen? Actually, I'd really rather go lie down. He pressed his lips together hard as he studied me. Finally, he nodded. I'll bring you to your room and then go get you something to eat. I can have the maids bring up lunch, Bobby interjected. Will's whole body tensed as he turned to the beta wolf, but I interrupted before he could speak. Thanks, Bobby. We'll talk later. No, you won't, Will grumbled. I slapped his chest, but it was a weak effort. Stop it. He huffed but let it go. Where's your room? Upstairs. He nodded and took off at a clipped pace. His hands were almost too rough as they gripped me tight to his body, but I didn't mind. My heavy head fell against his chest and I took the time to refamiliarize myself with the sound of his heartbeat. Which way? He asked next. To the left. I'm the first door on the right. I kept my eyes closed as he carried me, willing to get lost in this feeling, and let everything that came next wait a little longer. I heard him turn the door handle before he stopped entirely. Beatrice, he asked after a moment, why are you staying in this closet? My brows furrowed before I opened my eyes. There's nothing wrong with this room. Where is the master suite? My frown deepened. At the end of the other hall, and I am not sleeping in my asshole uncle's bed. Will sighed but didn't comment further as he stepped into the room and kicked the door closed behind him. He effortlessly carried me across the hardwood floor and set me down on the edge of the mattress. His gaze softened again as he crouched down to my level. How are you feeling? He asked. A lot better, honestly. I just think the sleepless nights are catching up to me. He reached out to cup my face and I couldn't help pressing my cheek harder against his palm. You've had a rough couple of weeks, he said. Despite my best efforts, my eyes filled with tears and I nodded. Will sighed again as he leaned in close and pressed his lips against my forehead. It's only going to get better from now on, okay? I promise. I squeezed my eyes closed and nodded again, willing the tears to stay where they were. Will blew out another deep breath before he pulled away and picked up my foot. I looked down to find him pulling my sneaker off and tossing it aside. Why? Don't you take a nap? You can eat when you wake up. My lids were so heavy I could barely keep them open, but I was terrified to go to sleep. Terrified that if I closed my eyes, he'd vanish. That I'd wake up and realize all of this was just a sick dream and Will was still gone. He set my other foot down before grasping my chin and tilting my face toward him. Why is your heart beating so fast? It only pounded harder as I shook my head. I didn't want to admit it was fear, making my heart thunder in my chest. I didn't want to be that weak. But as I stared at Will on his knees in front of me, I thought maybe I could be a little vulnerable with him. I just don't want you to leave again, I admitted. Beatrice, he began. With every ounce of bravery I had left, I met his gaze and read the truth for myself in his green eyes. I'm not going anywhere without you. I belong with you. There was no stopping the tear that raced down my cheek. What if I don't know where I belong? He shook his head as he wiped the wetness off my face. It's always going to be with me. We can figure out the location later. Before I could answer, he pulled my face close and kissed me. It was easy, after that, to believe his simple words, to let his confidence infuse me with a strength I'd been missing, to trust that together we could handle anything. I just hadn't known how soon we'd have to test that theory. Chapter 7. B. Where the hell have you been? Will stopped short the moment he swung the kitchen door open, and Bobby's angry voice reached us. We were both silent as the beta wolf rounded the island headed our way. You disappeared hours ago for what was supposed to just be a nap, he continued. My stomach fell as I struggled to get out of Will's arms, but he wasn't budging. The original werewolf's eyes were laser-focused on Bobby, and his jaw was clenched so tight I was surprised it hadn't shattered yet. Who the hell do you think you're talking to? Will snarled. Will, stop it. Put me down. He gripped me tighter as Bobby took another step toward us. I'm talking to the wolf who is supposed to be running this goddamn pack, not hiding in her room fucking her new boyfriend all day. Embarrassment chased the guilt right out of my system, but I had no time to focus on that. Will's entire body was trembling, and I knew he was only seconds away from shifting with me still in his arms. Will, I barked. He ignored me, but with a burst of strength, I broke out of his arms and fell to my feet. Will snarled behind me, but I ignored him as I placed myself between them. Bobby, you need to calm down. The beta werewolf speared me with a quick glare before turning to Will again. Tell him to calm down. I glanced over my shoulder at Will. Can you please rein it in? He glared at me too and I rolled my eyes. Seemed I couldn't win with either of them. I'm sick of being the only one who ever does anything around here, Bobby continued, his dark gaze on me now. The guilt was thick as it coated my insides, and my stomach fell again. I'm sorry. You're right. No, fuck that. Will yelled from behind me. What did you do today in her absence that was so taxing? Bobby opened his mouth, but then shut it before anything could come out. His face turned red as I stood there, waiting for him to speak. Finally he said, there was a whole afternoon of phone meetings she missed, and the first enforcer training was supposed to happen last night. I winced and looked down at my feet. Every word he said was true. I did have responsibilities, and I'd shirked them in favor of taking a nap. What kind of alpha did that? Hell, I wouldn't have even done that as a beta. So, did you reschedule the meetings, or did you handle them yourself? Will asked next. Bobby didn't even blink as he tried to stare him down over my shoulder. I rescheduled them. I had other things to take care of today. Will nodded as he stepped up next to me. And the training session? Did you run that for her? Bobby's eyes narrowed, fists clenching tight at his sides. No. Cancelled. That training session was her idea. Why should I have to do it? It felt like I lost an inch with every word he spoke. Soon there'd be nothing left of me. You're right, I said again. Those trainings are my responsibility. I dropped the ball. No, that's not how this shit works, Will insisted as he took another step forward. As the beta, your job is to help your alpha, to cover for her, to take over the responsibilities of this pack when she isn't able to. Instead, what you did was dodge the extra work and then bitch about it. I grabbed Will's arm. No, he's right. I shouldn't have slept all day. My werewolf turned back with eyes that burned with indignation, but somehow softened for me. You weren't well. You needed the rest. Was the sex necessary too? Bobby interrupted. Will spun back around with a growl. That is none of your goddamn business. My face burned with shame, but he wasn't done. And she only just woke up. What did you expect her to accomplish at 4 in the morning? He yelled. You know what? Bobby said. I don't have time for this shit. I have a full day of work ahead of me. Will crossed his arms over his chest. Then go. The beta wolf continued to stare him down for what felt like hours before he finally turned and stormed out of the room. I watched him leave, my stomach a mess of knots. He's right, I murmured when I couldn't hear Bobby's footsteps anymore.
Eva.
Barely done anything since I've been here. Will turned around and grabbed my hips, pulling me against him. You were sick, Bea. You couldn't help that. I shook my head and nestled into his hold. I wasn't that sick in the beginning. I was just too sad to get out of bed. He sighed and squeezed me tighter. I don't think there's enough time in just one life for me to tell you how sorry I am. Stop, I mumbled against his hard chest. There's nothing to apologize for. He sighed again before kissing the top of my head and pulling away. We'll have to agree to disagree on that. I opened my mouth to argue, but the sound of several approaching vehicles reached us at that moment and I snapped it closed instead. Our anxious gazes met in the dark kitchen as we waited for what came next. When they pulled to a stop out front, several doors opened and slammed shut. Before a familiar voice rang out. That old asshole really was tacky, wasn't he? I couldn't stop the smile from spreading across my face before I grabbed Will's hand and dragged him toward the front door. I opened it just as my sister reached up to knock. Evie's eyes went wide with shock before she smiled. Hey, Bea. I pulled her into my arms before the tears could fall. I'm so glad you're here, I whispered in her ear. My youngest sister squeezed me back. I'm sorry I didn't come sooner. I didn't. I sniffed as I pulled away. How could you have known? Callie dragged me into her arms next. We should have come down here sooner. We should have known when you didn't answer your phone that something was wrong. Dell was next, her arms just as strong as our other 2 sisters. We would have been here earlier, but I had a show, she murmured. Why didn't you tell us things were so bad? My loudmouthed, pink-haired sister sounded sadder than I'd ever heard her, and it was breaking my heart. I squeezed her tight. I didn't want anyone to see me like that, I admitted. I was embarrassed. Dell scoffed as she pulled out of my arms to glare at me. Girl, I had to live with you through your preteens. Nothing could be more embarrassing than that. A laugh burst out of my mouth, the sound so joyful it took me by surprise. Come here, my brother muttered before I was yanked into his big arms. I shut my eyes as Abby held me close, happy just to be with my family again. Will you give me a turn? Ellie griped from nearby. Abraham chuckled, but of course gave in to his mate. The tall blonde walked up to me next and wrapped her arms around my shoulders. We're here to help, she promised softly, and the tears were back instantly. It wasn't until Ellie finally released me that I noticed how quiet everyone was. Will stood an awkward distance away. His face relaxed, but the tension in his shoulders gave him away. I knew he felt guilty for how bad the past couple of weeks had been, and I assumed my siblings had figured out he'd had something to do with that. I'd expected them to not be happy with him at all, so I was shocked by what came out of my brother's mouth next. So you 2 are fated, huh? I turned to him with wide eyes. Yeah, we are, I said. How did you know? Abby rolled his eyes. He told me. How do you think he got down here? I glanced toward the parking area and noticed his pickup for the first time. You let Will borrow your truck? Abraham shrugged. Yeah, of course. My jaw almost hit the floor. I've asked to borrow your truck 100 times. And you've always told me no. You wanted to go off-roading, he said between gritted teeth. Will was coming down here to save your life. I stared at my brother. the emotion on his face so intense it almost brought me to tears again. I thought I was going to lose you, he admitted in a broken whisper. I would have carried him down here myself if it made you better. I stumbled toward him, not doubting he'd catch me. Abraham's arms were tight around my shoulders as I wet his shirt with my tears.
I'm okay, I promised.
He let out a shaky breath and kissed the top of my head. Good. Let's keep it that way, he said quietly to me. Then louder he added, and listen, I had to ride in Elle's toy car with my knees to my chest the whole way down here, so someone better be feeding me. Leave my car alone, his mate yelled. Actually, Will was just about to cook, I called over the arguing couple. The crowd fell silent as all eyes swung toward the original werewolf. You cooking us all breakfast, lover boy? Abraham asked. Will swallowed. Sure. I hope scrambled eggs are okay because that's all I know how to make. Evie's tinkling laugh rang out as she walked over to Will and patted him on the shoulder. Don't worry, I'm cooking. Just show me where the kitchen is. With pleasure, Will muttered as he grasped her elbow and led her inside. Del and Callie followed them right into the estate like they'd been here 100 times before. Abraham wrapped one arm around me and the other around his mate and pulled us along behind them. This place is huge, Ellie commented as we crossed the foyer. You've got to have dozens of enforcers living here. I scoffed. Actually, it's just me and the two maids. Maids? My brother deadpanned. Yeah, I said with a sigh. I'm working on it. We made it to the kitchen just in time to catch the tail end of a fight between my sisters. She always makes what you want, Callista. It's my turn to pick. She just made you eggs Benedict last week, Delilah, or have you forgotten? That was like a month ago. Del yelled back. It was last Tuesday. No, it wasn't. Will y'all pipe down? I'm not making either of you anything.
I'm making
French toast. I smiled as I crossed the room. My favorite. Evie shot me a grin before turning around and getting to work. I offered to help, but she ordered me to go sit down and I knew better than to cross her. She worked quickly with Callie's help, and soon the kitchen was full of the smell of home cooking in my family. Mary and the other mates stuck their heads in right before we sat down there, eyes wide with matching looks of shock. Hey, do you two want to join us for breakfast? I called from the table. They turned to each other before Mary looked back at me with a shrug. If you've got enough. Del laughed as she set the table. No, and Evelyn, there's enough for all of us to each eat twice. No one's going hungry on my watch. Evie called over her shoulder from the stove. The two women stood awkwardly in the middle of the kitchen, clearly unsure of where they were expected to be. I rose from my seat and waved them over. Come. Have a seat. I'm getting drinks, ladies, Ellie said as she stood too. What can I get you? They exchanged another cautious glance before Mary cleared her throat. I'll have black coffee. I'll have the same, the other one piped up. I'm embarrassed to admit I don't think I ever caught your name, I said. The second mate turned to me with wide eyes. It's Tessa, Alpha. Call me Bea, I responded automatically. Silence descended for one awkward moment before I broke it. How long have you two worked in the estate? I've been here a month, Tessa said. It's been 6 for me, Mary added. Now that surprised me. Oh, I don't know why I thought you'd been working here longer, I muttered. That is long for this position, Mary argued. And I'm surprised we're both still here. What do you mean? The two maids shared a quick look before she answered. Conrad doesn't keep his help for long and we were told you'd be replacing us. I jerked back in shock at that news. Who told you that? Mary's eyes turned wary. Bobby, Mom. Well, I don't know where he got that idea, I said, my mind spinning. You two do your jobs well. I have no plans to hire anyone new. They sat there, silent for a moment, both of them looking suspicious. I didn't know why Bobby would say something like that, but I knew I needed to find out. I had a bad feeling there was even more that had escaped my attention in the past couple weeks. Now that I was feeling better, I needed to get to the bottom of this situation immediately. Evie came bustling over with a platter full of steaming hot slices of French toast and my mouth watered. Hope you ladies don't mind I used up all the bread, my sister said to the maids as Callie walked over with plates of bacon, sausage, and ham. You'll also need some more breakfast meats, she added. Mary chuckled. We're getting cooked for today. We're not going to complain about adding a few things to the shopping list. Good, my sister said as she finally took a seat, her eyes bright as she watched us all fill our plates. Everyone eat up. We fell quiet after that, everyone's mouths too full to talk. Unfortunately, for me the peace didn't last. So you two are really fated? Dell asked around a bite of French toast. Don't talk with your mouth full, Delilah, Callie muttered. Our middle sister rolled her eyes and ignored her. Well, she prompted. Will's hand found my thigh under the table and squeezed. We are, he confirmed. The butterflies in my stomach were vicious as they beat at my insides. Dell nodded as she chewed and swallowed. Okay, so when are you two having your mating ceremony? The entire room fell silent. The only sound our collective heartbeats, mine fastest of all. We haven't talked about that yet, I stuttered. Dell, they've been back together for 1 day, Abraham chastised her. Give them a second to breathe. I say y'all have your ceremony today, Dell continued like she hadn't heard. Abby can officiate. Will's hand tightened around my thigh as my heart stopped dead in my chest. What? I whispered.
Del Strad.
We're all here. Why wait? My heart started beating again, thundering so loud it was all I could hear. Met every expectant gaze directed at me, saving his for last. When I finally looked at Will, I realized I should have started with him. His green eyes were so soft, so hopeful as he stared at me. He leaned closer, his lips at my ear as he whispered, Are you ready to make this official? I pulled back so I could meet his eyes again, a smile spreading across my face. I was ready yesterday.